All right, welcome. Welcome to Module 3 of the Divine Simulation Blueprint. Like I said in the beginning of each video, this is just a quick and dirty blueprint of the general concepts of the modern illumination of what we're trying to do here, right? So even though these topics, everything in it could be expounded upon and talked about for hours and hours and forever, but that's not the goal of this series. It's just quick and dirty principles to connect certain dots, certain fundamental thoughts that people have that, from my experience, once you adjust those correctly or in a different way, they can open new doors of understanding. And that's my intention and what I'm trying to do. So here in the module 3, we're talking about the gaps in traditional religion. Now, I want to be clear. I am not a blasphemer. Okay. If you're looking for that type of thing, I'm not the one. That's not what I do. I respect and I reverence, the Most High, and I respect tradition and I respect religion for what it's supposed to be and what it is. I don't get into all of the, malcontent attitudes that some people may have based on their experience. It's just that's not what I do. Okay. So here I'm trying to build, right? As opposed to just complain and criticize with no actual conclusion that moves us forward. So that being said, let's get right into it. If I can get my pointer working. So what we're talking about in this one, religion loses clarity over time. Like information entropy, the original wisdom of religion weakens as it is retold through generations. So just like the telephone game, if anyone has ever played, where someone gets a message and they're told to then tell the message to the person next to them, and then they tell it to the person next to them, and on and on. And then by the time that the message has been relayed through a number of people, what happens is that the message changes. That is what's called entropy because the order of the information was lost. Okay, so that's information entropy. Information technology and information theory and Claude Shannon and all of that's real deep. But with regard to the wisdom that religion taught throughout the thousands of years of human history, anyone who believes that everything we have at present is as pristine and clear and potent as it was originally is just being immature, in my opinion. I'm not saying there isn't truth. I'm not saying there isn't value. I'm saying that wisdom is lost, meaning knowing where everything fits, especially when you're talking about higher levels of idea about the universe, the meaning of life, and understanding and comprehending and cognizing it at the higher levels, right? Over time, the message just gets lost, and you see we have images here, you know, ancient Kemet, which was, 4,500 years ago that we know of, probably went back maybe 10,000 years or whatever, you know, nobody has really, for the most part, a way of actually knowing because you're going to mix in and pollute the ideas of what the people really thought and believed, you know. 'Cause if you wasn't there to witness it and catch the vibe, you're just gonna miss it. Here you have the ancient Sumerian entity, right? I think that's one of the Anunnakis, as they claim. I don't get into the Anunnaki stuff. If that's you, that's fine. I'm only showing these images to show how humanity and its traditions have been around for a long time. And the essence of the wisdom a lot of times gets lost. And we go delve into how that works and why it's important. And also we see the images of the modern famous traditions that a lot of people follow, understanding that the human story is so old and has so many chapters and so much nuance, so many languages, so many cultures. Like I said, the wisdom in a lot of cases gets lost. And, you know, I put that on people. I don't put that on the Most High, but that's because we as people, we have a responsibility. That's part of being a free will creature, that you now become responsible for your situation because you have the ability to think and create ideas and then choose how you act and so forth. So the problem of face value People often accept religion only as it appears today, unaware what has been lost and misunderstood over the centuries, right? And one aspect of how that happens, you can see here the definition of the word meme. A meme today is famously known as the images that we share on social media, the funny cat photos or all of the famous memes that we've seen come about since social media and mobile computing, right? However, what most people don't take into consideration, you see there on the left is Richard Dawkins, the I forgot what you call him exactly, what type of biologist he is, evolutionary biologist, Richard Dawkins, right? He coined a phrase in 1976 in evolutionary biology. A meme is a gene of information. And if you remember module 1, genes and genetics and DNA carry literal information. So he coined the phrase meme because DNA and genes would pass on aspects of information. That's why, a child will look just like his uncle, right? Or a child will look just like her grandmother because they're passing on patterns of information from one person to the next. But the meaning of the word meme, right, is an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spread from person to person within culture. Because the original definition of meme, coined by evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene, is a unit of cultural transmission. It is a concept meant to be the cultural equivalent of a gene. So the use of the word for the little pictures, the funny pictures of today, was adapted after it was already coined to represent information being transmitted genetically and then culturally. That's why you have, you know, that's how culture evolves and transfers and continues because people just pass it around. When new things happen, when something new in the culture happens, a new event, we pass it around, right? The new, Drake Kendrick Lamar beef, right? So now, if you show a picture of Kendrick Lamar smiling at the Super Bowl, that's a meme now. Everybody knows what that means. They know what that face when he said, "Hey Drake," and looked at the camera. If you share that with somebody, right? They automatically know the energy, the emotion, the thought, the humor, the ideas that come along merely with the image. Now, how is that related to this whole topic? Because what happens when we introduce things culturally that mixes and mingles with other information, like religion, that then takes it in a direction other than its original intent, its original definition, or its original wisdom, right? Over time, the wisdom gets lost. That doesn't mean the whole religion is, bad or evil. I don't get into that, but some people claim that. What I'm saying is that with regard to the types of ideas that we're discussing in this community, right? The wisdom sometimes gets lost, and especially relating, to other things, as in the last module, talking about secret societies and esoteric philosophy, occult philosophy. Occult only means hidden. It doesn't mean anything evil or negative. It just means something that's hidden, something you can't see, right? And there are many things you can't see. That's why you need wisdom, because with wisdom, you can see and understand things at a level where you can connect the dots, right? So cultural context matters because religion, when it originally was founded, or the different evolutions or the different chapters in the human history and the human story with different religions, it came in different times and had different cultural contexts. So uh, what they call the Last Supper with Jesus and the disciples. I chose the non-famous image on purpose because most people have one image associated with the Last Supper, but there's dozens of depictions of the Last Supper. Nevertheless, I don't know if the Last Supper actually happened or not. I'm sure there had to be a time where, you know, the person who, allegedly is Jesus was hanging with his friends, around the table. That probably had to happen, right? But if you weren't there, much of the wisdom that was happening there is lost. It just is, right? Likewise, you see the middle image, which is a depiction of ancient Mecca, right? So when the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, was teaching and preaching, and being a role model for people, the context of what happened and what took place, if you weren't there, you're never going to be able to understand it on that level, right? And all of this is important. We're going to get to that. And then even you see here above the ancient Kemetic imagery, right? Looks like it's on a papyrus. Now, I don't know if this is authentic or not. Nevertheless, it does represent images. You see the I think that's Anubis with the scale, because they had the belief that the heart would be weighed against a feather, and if it was lighter than the feather, then the soul is right, and it can go on to the afterlife, in peace and so forth. All of these religions said the same thing, did they not? So how can you have thousands and thousands of years of traditions that point to a lot of overall general principles, right? But then they have all of these different differences because the entropy of human beings, and that's not necessarily always because of bad intentions on the part of people. It's just the nature of being a mortal. It's just the nature of being a mortal. We can't help it, right? We could try our best, but you can't help. Information's gonna get lost, wisdom's gonna get lost, and that was a part of the agenda of some of the schools, like I mentioned in the last module, was to preserve certain wisdom so that the seekers who wanted that level of understanding could go find it, right? But even beyond that, what's also important is that the context, as they tried to teach ideas, were in the context of the culture and the people of that time. They had a different language. They had a different culture. It was a different circumstance. So you can't use the same words and the same vernacular and the same vocabulary that we use today, right? In 4,000 years ago, they spoke differently. Certain things didn't exist. They didn't have internet back then. They had not lived after World War I and II back then. They did not talk about in the time when Jesus was on the earth in the same manner that people talk about him 2,000 years later, according to how everything is told. We just as an example, right? So it has to be kept in context because it may be an idea that's easy to understand, but if you speak it and you try to teach it, in a dogmatic fashion that it has to be this way that we think it was as transmitted to us, you may lose some of the insight if you're trying to have insight, right? And so what happens today is people get overly dogmatic and they think that what I heard as I grew up or learned my religion is all there is to think, and all the thoughts have been thought, and there's nothing else. And if you challenge that in any way, even if it's trying to increase it in wisdom and clarity, people look at that as, that's evil or bad. And like in the last video, that's why people attack. That's why they attack the mystery traditions. And they say, oh, they worship Lucifer. People will say something is the devil just because it's different. And it may actually be more in line with what they think they believe in than they actually believe. That actually happens a lot, right? So when you don't have the context to align the words with the actual ideas objectively, you lose a lot. Hidden scientific truths. Ancient scriptures often pointed towards realities we now describe with science. For example, and I'm gonna give you an example here from the Holy Quran, because it's one of the most clear examples. Because what we're talking about as far as simulation theory, right? First module was about information is the fundamental element of reality. Therefore, reality had to be generated and created, from outside by something bigger and greater than us, and information is evidence of that, right? And then I mentioned how the mystery groups, right, the so-called secret societies, they passed on and held on to the philosophy of how to unite all of these different types of ideas to have a whole understanding. What we're talking about now, for example, in religion, you'll have a verse and people may not connect these dots, right? In the Holy Quran, in the second chapter, in the 25th verse, it uses these words. It says, "Wa utu bihi mutashabiha." I'm not gonna read the whole thing, right? That part that's underlined in red. It says, and they were given what was similar to it, right? It said whenever they were given food, they would say, "This is like what we were provided for," um, and it is given to them in likeness. That's a bad translation. Basically, it says the people are going to be given food in heaven, right? This is what it says in the Quran. People are going to be given food in heaven, and when they get the food, they're going to say, "Oh, this is like what we had before." And it said, "It is, but it's only similar to what you had before." right? So what does this have to do with simulation theory? What does it have to do with science? What does it have to do with the secret societies? All of these ideas. What I'm saying is that it does not explicitly say if heaven, right, is a dimension of reality that is entirely outside time and space as we know it. Because according to its description in all the traditions that do believe in heaven, it lasts forever. It already exists and it always will exist. So it's entirely a different time space reality beyond ours. Allegedly, according to the stories, it says that people there don't age. They don't use the bathroom. They don't get old. Therefore, this is a different dimension of time space. It's not our time space reality. It's a different one. Evidently, it's bigger and greater and more powerful. So if that dimension is bigger, greater, and more powerful, however, is things in this dimension that look like things in that dimension, then what would you call this world compared to that world? Wouldn't it be fair to call it a simulation by our language and our culture? This is the reason for this module. In our language and our culture, we would call our world a simulation of that world, right? And it says here in this verse, it says, "Wa utubihi mutashabihat." That word mutashabihat literally means similar to it. They were given what was similar to it. They were given, meaning in this world, people eat food, but the food in this world is similar to the food of an even bigger world, an even more powerful dimension that's higher than this one, right? And I use the word dimension on purpose because many of the physicists and scientists today, they talk about and they theorize all around about different dimensions. And literally the most practical answer and probable answer has to be that our dimension of reality has to be generated. The power, the energy, right? That's under the matter, and the information that orders the energy has to be generated and broadcast and come from somewhere of a more powerful level of existence. So that's a dimension. That's what the word dimension means. And this dimension is lower than it. So everything is here is a pattern from there. And I believe that's one of those Aristotelian philosophies as well. The ancient Greeks was big into that. So based on that, it's quite simple. This is a simulation. So this is what I mean, gaps in religion. It's not a gap in a religion as opposed to a gap in our understanding of religion, because we don't approach understanding text from the religions with these things in mind. However, if we do, it could possibly open our minds up to a more comprehensive way of looking at life and reality, and not living and operating in a fashion where it's science versus religion, right? And then having this third subject of the secret society that is some spooky weird thing. Rather, understanding we're trying to solve a huge puzzle, a huge mystery, right? And these clues help us understand and get closer to understanding the mystery, right? So then, even in the Bible, right? Because I want to be fair to the different traditions that are popular in the world. In the Bible, it says, "In the beginning was the Word." In John 1, 1, 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything that was made. That's here again, you have the text speaking in a certain manner. Nobody talks like this today, right? Nobody talks like this. But it's still trying to give us information. So how close to understanding the intent behind these words are we actually getting when we don't even speak English in this manner? And frankly, whatever, this could not have been the language of the person who it is allegedly claiming to quote. But that's not what this is about. This is about what is it saying, beneath the words when you put the clues together. If in the beginning was the word, what are words? Words are information. So if in the beginning was the word and the word was with God, so what does that mean? That means the information was with the supreme creator, the supreme source, the supreme all-knowing, right? Who possesses all of the knowledge, all of the information, and has the will and the power to do anything or what it wants to with the information, right? And the word was God. Now, I'm not going to get into speculating on how you're supposed to understand this, right? I'm just saying when you keep these things in mind, it indicates that we definitely live in a simulation, and that's not a strange or fringe idea. It's always been articulated. We just never articulated it in these new information technology terms, these new modern computer science words. But I think it's useful for us to use these words because it's easier for our minds to comprehend at a level that's more practical for our generation and our time, right? Because when you try to make your mind comprehend language outside of your culture and context, sometimes you end up having to kind of, force yourself to believe and you don't really know, right? Because after understanding the scientific definition of information, right? Then when you see this verse that says, in the beginning was the word and the word was with God, and you say, okay, inevitably there could be no other way. What other way can it be? The only other way it can be is denial. And you say, I just don't care. I don't want to think about it, right? But if you care to think and you care to know, then these things point to these facts. So that's all this module is about. It's not to bash religion. It's just to say that we have gaps in understanding that when we close the gap, we can understand more. So, like I said, bridging the gap. When we interpret religion through both cultural understanding and modern knowledge, its wisdom becomes clear and relevant again, right? And I say relevant again because unfortunately, there are fundamentalists in the world. There are dogmatists, people who all they know how to do is follow what they've been told. And if you think anything different, then you automatically wrong, right? Even though the truth is extremely larger than that. I think my gift didn't come out too well on camera. Nevertheless, oh, that's because it's green, the green screen. Anyway, as you can see, I like the image over here on the left with the the all-seeing eye or the eye of illumination or whatever you want to call it. That's why symbols and symbology is so profound because there is no one definition, right? It means whatever you intuit based on your level of understanding, and it's over the dictionary because, with insight and wisdom and depending on your depth of understanding, that will then illuminate the meanings of the words and what words mean for you and for us, right? And the goal of it all is just to make the life better for ourselves. And then the better we get, the better we can be. And then we become better amongst everyone else. And then we make the collective better. Right. And one reason why the world is so crummy today, because a lot of people are selfish and egotistical and don't want to be better. They want to be better as long as it's going along with their ego and their selfish desires. I'm getting ahead of myself, but when you want to be better in the sense that you learn how to become selfless and think of yourself less and be able to share and help with others, that's how you truly start to make the world a better place. But that's far beyond the scope of this here. Short module. If you want to share that, we got one more, maybe two more in the Divine Simulation Blueprint. Please leave a comment, go in the community section and start a conversation. Let me know what I missed because I know I missed a lot. Let me know how I could do it better and catch you on the next module. Thank you.